so it's really important that we have a strong showing at that time, and that we make sure that they understand what our experiences have been like as METCO parents, as METCO guardians, grandparents, and what their children's experiences have been like as well. So March 19th, mark it down. You don't have to spend the entire day there, just a couple of hours in the morning. You have about a month and a half notice to take some time to do that. And the other thing that I ask you to do when you're reaching out to our Brookline Friends of METCO group is to bring a friend, bring a resident. Because as we've talked about many times before, as I'm sure you'll hear the superintendent say, because I've heard him say it many times, the METCO program is not simply to serve families living in Boston. It is here to serve families living within the Brookline community. And so it's really important that our elected officials understand not only how it benefits your child or your children, but how it also benefits children that are living in families altogether, living in the Brookline community. So I ask you, I plead with you, to join us during that time. METCO has been, things have been going well, I'd say, for the most part, in terms of how our kids are doing. Our kids are involved in pretty much every aspect of life in Brookline, and to me, that's one of the most exciting things to see happening, is that our kids are taking advantage of the opportunities that Brookline can offer. And so, recently, we created a partnership for our 8th grade students. I know some 8th graders in here, to take advantage of retutoring at the high school through the Calculus project. And we have other things that are happening that we want to make sure that you are aware of. So I'll be communicating through email and other ways throughout the course of the year. So if you didn't receive an email from me this afternoon, make sure you check your school with the email. So we do have a special guest with us tonight. Dr. Philippi is here, the superintendent of schools. And this is a time for us to be able to talk with him about how things are going, questions that you might have, concerns you might have. And I know, you'll probably see this one, I want to see what you'll say. But I know that sometimes we get a little shy, and I know there's no one shy in this room. But sometimes we get a little bit shy. And so don't take too long to warm up. He's here with us to talk with you about things we're going and to answer any questions you might have. Okay, so welcome.
Thank you. Hi. Great turn around here. Thanks for coming. The thing I'll say up front is all of these this year, because I do these forums for a number of programs within the district as well as at each school. I think I'll probably see some of you at the individual school forums as well. And they are all recorded by our local access TV. So we have our own YouTube channel, very cool. And they all go up there so that people can check and make sure that I say the same thing here that I might say when I go to your school, and that I'm not sort of making it up as I go, although I make it up as I go once in a while. So thanks for coming. The way we normally do these is I have a couple things up front that I want to talk about so that you know some things that are sort of hot on the burner for the schools. And then I'll just open up for questions for an hour or so. And we'll talk about what you want to know. Okay? So, let me talk about enrollment, override, and buildings. Why don't I start there? I see some nodding of heads, so people looking good. So we are in, hopefully, the final stages of the Board of Selectmen deciding on what an override question might look like that they would put to the vote. Meaning, this week, you probably got an email from me. The Board of Selectmen are having 2 public hearings this week, and they put out for people to comment on some possible questions. So some possible questions for an override, which has to do with our operating budget, teachers, supplies, materials, those kinds of things. And then for capital, which are buildings, in this case, largely the devotion school project. Okay? So that's called a debt exclusion. And then there's an override. And we're actually, for the first time in Brookline, talking about both at the same time. That's not happening. So they're in the midst of this public hearing process. And either next week or the week after, their normal meetings are on Tuesday night, they will theoretically decide on questions and put those questions out, and then campaign season begins, right? It's sort of the informational sessions and all that we'll do. But essentially, what I want to say to you tonight is what those are sort of made up of from our perspective, right? So you know, many of you know, I'm sure, that our enrollment has increased dramatically at the elementary level, particularly at the elementary level, but those numbers are all moving towards the high school. So the elementary enrollments, well, the district enrollment, essentially since I came to the district in 2004, has moved from about 5,600 to north of 7,600 students in that time, okay? This has largely been at the elementary school, and what further complicates it is we actually have still a growing enrollment. So I would have stood in front of you, probably did, some of you, right, 10 years ago and said, our enrollments are growing. And at that time, I would have been talking about a kindergarten enrollment, which was in the 480 to 500 student range. The problem is this isn't just growth, it's accelerated growth. In other words, we've continued to grow. So this year's kindergarten is 695 students. So what I called growth 10 years ago, I would now call stability, right? So our numbers have continued to grow. And you know, because your kids are in schools, that what that's done at the elementary level in particular, right? So we have schools like Driscoll School. When I came to the district, it was 350 students, right? Today is over 550 students. Devotion, the Pierce School, which somebody just pointed out to me the other day, which at one point was in that 600 range, which now on some days of the week is the largest school in the district at over 800. Pierce Baker Devotion, they have a little contest on a daily basis as to who's the largest. So that's what's happened at the elementary level. What does that mean at the high school level? Well, we've largely been in the 1,700 to 1,800 student level while I've been in the district. But very quickly now, these classes are going to begin to get to the high school. They're at the 7th and 8th grade level now. And by 2022, we'll be over 2,600 students at Brookline High School. And we don't have space for 2,600 students. So there are lots of conversations going on in terms of capital, right? This devotion project will take devotion to a 5-section per grade level school of over 1,000 students. Now for those, it's over 800 now, right? And there are some 5 sections in there now. So we're building largely to what we're filling the building with. I'll come back to that in a minute because maybe I have kids at devotion. Maybe, yeah, okay. So let me talk a little bit about what that looks like in the interim. Probably didn't want to know that. And so then we're talking about the high school, and then we're talking about what other elementary project might we need to do. Is it a 9th school? Is it the Driscoll concept that we talked about last year when I was here? What are those next steps? And is the state, through the school building authority, going to participate with us on that? Because they pay about 30 to 40% of the project. It's a lot of money. The devotion project right now is looking like $115 to $120 million project. Okay? So at devotion in the interim, we're going to begin to use the old Lincoln School again. So next year, devotion 7th and 8th grade, before we even start the renovation, because we actually haven't started next year, devotion 7th and 8th grade will move to the old Lincoln School. The following year, the 5th and 6th grade will join them. This is about the time that parents are going like this, trying to figure where in this whole thing their kids fit. And K to 4, we're still looking for space because our goal in the end would be to try to move all the students out of the school. It's a quicker project, right? We think we can make it a safe project for everyone, but quite frankly, not having to deal with that would be easier. So we're still looking for room where we might be able to move K to 4 and empty the building. The architects have told us that the project gets done a year sooner than we're presently projecting if we move everyone out. Okay, and is somewhat cheaper. So that's what we're dealing with in devotion, and now we're starting, and some of you may have seen this already. If you don't, if you haven't, I would encourage you. I think it's February 11th at the high school. There's going to be a meeting where the architects who we have looking on what's called a concept study will begin to talk about what's possible, what we're looking at, what we're dreaming about at Brookline High School. Are we going to build more on that campus? That's one possibility. Are we going to build a second Brookline High School? That's another possibility. Are we going to find a building where we can have a specialized program somewhere near the campus, where we can build another building or have another building to occupy for a particular program, school within school, for example? That's a possibility. All those possibilities are on the table, and we need your feedback. The school committee needs your feedback on what you think we should be looking at, because it's a very difficult issue. Some of you may have noticed, probably you've had occasion to notice, that parking and drop-off and those kind of issues in Brookline is a bit of a challenge, right? And so imagine a Brookline High School, for those of you who've gone there, and just imagine the issues we're dealing with as we start to look at this, and add a third more students to that mix, which means around a third more staff, right? And you imagine what the parking plan must look like. So we're looking at parking garages, underground, we're looking at all of that in this project, and we're going to have to. So that all gets financed through a debt, the devotion part of that gets financed through a debt exclusion, right? And then we need other monies for some other short-term things. How many people are at Baker? Yeah, so at Baker, you may have heard that we're looking at modulars for next year. We're actually, over the next 2 or 3 years, about 4 classrooms short at Baker School. So we're looking at modulars as a short-term solution to some of that. How many of you are Pierce? Pierce. So at Pierce, we're looking at renting space in that area. I see a lot of nodding heads which say principals are telling you these things, which is great, right? That's terrific, right? You're not hearing this from me for the first time. That's terrific. So at Pierce, we're looking at renting space. And I've said to some parents, you could probably walk into the school and notice the 4 rent signs and figure out the kinds of spaces we're looking at. And we're looking at creating classrooms there. We're looking at the possibility of Pierce of whether we might create a satellite cafeteria, because a lot of our common spaces won't hold the numbers of students that we have, right? We don't have room in auditoriums, we don't have room in cafeteria, we're starting lunches too early. You know, I was in a meeting the other day, I looked at my watch, I said, oh, it's 10:30, time for lunch at a number of our elementary schools, right? And that's the condition right now. So the debt exclusion is largely about devotion and trying to free up some capacity for some of these other things, rental spaces. Some of you may know, we spend right now, because of what we've had to do with early education, pre-K, we spend $500,000 on rent every year to rent spaces for our pre-Ks that we moved out of our elementary schools. Some of you may have been around long enough that you remember when we had pre-K in every one of our elementary schools. That's no longer the condition. We're now renting spaces for those classes. And we're going to rent more. Pre-K is going to be moving out of high school at some point, because we're going to need the space for Brookline High School. So we're going to need dollars for that rental as short-term kinds of people. So the sort of operating part of this, the override, is really about staff. So I've stood in front of groups like this every year and said the one thing that we're pretty proud of that we've been able to do is keep up with staffing in the classroom. Our average class size is only 1.5 students larger than it was back in 2004, despite the fact that we've grown by those 2,000 students. We're proud of that. Let me tell you what we're not proud of. I have the same number of guidance counselors at the Pierce School that I had when 600 students. I have the same nursing staff in the district, pretty much that I had when we were 2,000 students smaller. We've increased the number of literacy specialists in buildings by about 1.5 over all that time. So we made a decision when we started to grow. We were going to put our resources in the classroom. And we neglected these other areas. And what I've said to the Board of Selectmen is time's up. No more room to do that. We need additional capacity to put literacy specialists, math specialists, nurses, guidance counselors, social workers in the schools.
So that's the case we've made for this operating override, right? To begin to build that capacity in other areas driven by our enrollment that we've neglected over the last number of years. And to make sure that we're able to keep moving with a technology initiative that we started this past year. So my guess is that, like other parents, you've seen an increase in the amount of technology that's available to your students in all of our schools, whether it's high school or elementary schools. You've seen carts available to classroom teachers. I'm told today by one of our principals we need 2 more carts at this grade level because the carts are always out. A year ago, the carts didn't exist. That's good news. If you're a superintendent, you have an initiative that you've asked the board, school committee, the board of selectmen to spend lots of money on, you want to see that it's being used, right? It's being used. Our student rep to the school committee is reporting on how teachers at the high school are now infusing technology into their curriculum. And so we have quite an initiative that's in this plan to make sure that continues. So this spring will be a lot in Brookline about an override and about debt exclusion, right? And about how we're able to bring those resources to teachers and students. So on February 12th, I have to present at least 2 budgets. At least 2, depending on how they structure the questions, right? One is an override budget. If there's a successful override, what, Mr. Superintendent, will you recommend that the school committee adopt as our spending plan for next year? As I tell my senior staff all the time, that's the fun one. That's the fun one. The other isn't fun. The other says, what if there's no override or if it doesn't succeed? What will we have to reduce? What will we not be able to do? What kinds of programs might be cut? So both of those will unveil on the 12th, and actually be talking with the school committee. We've been talking at our finance subcommittee meetings, but we'll begin talking openly in public meetings tomorrow night. So we have a huge set of challenges in front of us. And I said, one of the things I said is, we first presented a view of what this override might, what kind of resources we needed back in October of 2013. Right? And that plan's around, you can see that plan, and it's out of date. It's very simply out of date. And the main reason it's out of date is that plan projected 630 new kindergartners every year. And over the last 2 years, we've had 650, 670, and 690. Right? And so we've had to adjust that plan to account for those numbers. And so I'll say to this group, as I say to our teachers, because you've heard, I know Susie's talked with you about the fact that once in a while in this discussion, you will hear people raise the issue of what they call our non-resident students. And when they talk about non-resident students, they're talking very simply about the children of our teachers who don't live in Brookline, those teachers who don't live in Brookline, and they're talking about METCO. And very simply, their argument is you have control over some piece of your enrollment that you, the school department, the school committee, have chosen not to exercise. And I think what you've heard through the B-Space process that went on, what you've heard through the override study process, what you've heard at public testimony, right, around the override, if you've been able to tune into any of those, and you should if you have time to do that, you should, is tremendous support on the part of the school committee, on the part of the administration, and on the part of residents for this program. So they say, and have said exactly what Susie said to you tonight, they talk about the value that this program brings to residents. They don't talk about what Brookline does for you. They talk about what you do for us. And have consistently at those public hearings. And will, I believe, consistently at the remainder of these public hearings and through this process, should a question end up on the ballot. Okay? You know what? Why don't I just stop there and see what you want to talk about? This is
is where Susie, remember Susie said, don't be shy, this is the part.
Can I add two quick things?
Yeah,
First, Susan, thank you so much for being here, Chair of our school committee in Brookline. Right over here, thank you for being here with us
Chair of our
tonight.
school committee.
Chair of the school committee. So please make sure, if you have any questions for her, I hope that's okay for me to say.
Yes, if you have a question for her, please feel free to ask them.
But the other thing I want to mention is that Brookline's commitment to METCO is firm. That there is a strong level of support. There may be people that question whether or not our district, our buildings, our facilities can handle additional students. But as we're moving forward and thinking ahead for next year, we're moving, in terms of METCO at least, business as usual. We're going to be looking at how many kids are graduating our program and then how many kids do we anticipate will be leaving. And we'll be looking to enroll that a similar number.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about reducing numbers for next year. I know that oftentimes comes up as a question, but that's not something that we've discussed. And I know that the hope, of course, is that we continue to maintain our district-wide enrollment.
Now, let me go speak to that. So there is one issue that you may have noticed is a little different over the last number of years. We have really, I would say over the last 3 years, and some of this is inside baseball, so I won't spend much time on it, but we've really tightened up our entire kindergarten registration process. And we've tried to push back assignment to schools of people who live in buffer zones and those non-resident families, right? Where I refuse to compromise is around the issue of our kindergarten orientation. We can practice to some of you, right? So those occur, we push those back into June. But I believe that everyone who is registered and who is on one of our rolls deserves an assignment before those peak in practice occurs, because we know what the research says about getting families engaged, getting kids engaged with kindergarten early. And we know what it does for our practice, we know what it does to our ability to screen students and identify particular issues that we may want to deal with or need to deal with as they enter kindergarten, if we have that information earlier. So, I mean, what I've said to some groups involved in the override study process is I refuse to compromise the educational program, right, for efficiencies. Now, that doesn't mean we might not need to do things in the future by, like, say, and we did this last year, this is a tentative assignment, right? We'll give you a permanent assignment in August, and we're going to certainly try to adhere to that temporary assignment, right? And last year, we did that with 15 families, and all 15 families got that as their permanent assignment, because that's my goal. So we've had to do a number of things to tighten up our process, particularly around buffer zones, materials fee, our employees, and METCO. And I quite frankly think it's actually in your kids' best interest, because what it does is it gives me better information in terms of making sure the class sizes are as balanced as they can be. So I don't end up with a 26 over here at Driscoll and an 18 over here at Lincoln, right? If you look at our class sizes across elementary, I think at one point this year, they may have changed since, we had 50 people register in January. 50 people register in January. But at one point, every class was a 21, a 22, or a 23. That's pretty good, right? So, and that was accomplished by us tightening up that process. So that's the only change that you will see. You won't see us backing off the 300. You just won't see us at this point backing off the 300. And that's been the stance of the school committee, and that's been the stance of the administration. I want to say one other thing. I mean, I'm committed and have been committed, many of you know because I've known many of you for the 11 years I've been here, to this program. I mean, I think the lobby day is a very important experience. I mean, we have an opportunity as superintendents to have those kind of conversations outside of that. I've been invited this year as one of 3 superintendents to participate with Representative Kaufman, who tends to be one of our leaders on this issue, around trying to figure out what the ask should be in the legislature. That also includes the superintendent from Weston, the superintendent from Lexington. We're the 3 that have been invited to really try to work through this with him. And I'm honored to be part of that, because this program is very, very important to me. So with that, why don't Representative Sanchez, how are you? What do you want to talk about? Yes?
Well, I hate to be doom and gloom, but worst case scenario, suppose the override is does not.
Yeah.
How does that potentially impact medical efforts or what I do with Susan and other programs to address it?
So at present, as we start to put together a budget for February 12th, we're not making any assumptions. We're not making any assumptions in terms of our non-resident programs, in terms of changes to those programs. But, so when you say doom and gloom means to me, we're looking at, we know we start out with a $650,000 hole in the no override scenario, okay? Now, that's not really $650,000, right? Because in that, I've added, just a minute ago when I talked about those guidance counselors, those nurses, that technology, that includes none of that. So if I decide to recommend, the school committee decides to adopt some portion of that, it only drives that $650,000 up. And then we have to have conversations, like some of the difficult conversations we've had over the last number of weeks about, do we fund those things and cut existing programs? Or do we not do those things? Or do we do some combination? But we have a hole to dig ourselves out. And it's a pretty significant hole. And it will compromise what we do in terms of the educational program, in my view. But to date, at least in terms of FY16, right, we've had no, that's next year's budget, sorry, I do budget easy. That's the 15-16 school year. We've not had conversations about changes to those programs. That does not mean they wouldn't come. But we've been looking at this in terms of what changes might be to make programmatic. Helpful at all?
Yeah, well, I think realistically, what we need
This is my view.
Yeah.
Right. Realistically, I think that, probably not for 15-16, but I've been asked in terms of the budget to proceed as if a no override is a new permanent condition, right? There's not a next override hanging out there in 16 that rides to the rescue and saves us. As a new permanent condition, my guess is there'd be a lot of very difficult conversations in Brookline about a lot of programs. You want to say something?
I would just add one thing, which is that even the people in town who have highlighted the cost of the program, and even the people in town who don't completely recognize the point of the METCO program, no one, not a single person has suggested, and I think this is great news, has suggested doing anything to children who are currently in the program.
Right.
So even that side of the spectrum, where we aren't, but no one has suggested that it would have an impact on children currently in the program. The conversation has entirely been about, is 300 a magic number? What if and I think when Jean came to Brookline and had a discussion with the override study committee, there were discussions about, is that number have to be 300 every single year over time, or is there some flexibility in it? I think everyone understands that below a certain number, it doesn't make sense to run the program. I mean, clearly there's a critical mass that's really important. And I do think that the overwhelming majority of people, really overwhelming majority, understand that even though Brookline has become more diverse in some ways, certainly in terms of English language learners, certainly in terms of countries of national origin, that this is different. That this is a different program, this is doing something different, it's important to residents, and so not all diversity is created equal. So I think that, so the specific answer to your question is, nobody has suggested impact on current children, and everyone understands that it would be, if there were anything, and we're not envisioning anything, that it would be after that.
And by the way, on the worst day of those conversations, I would also add that no one was talking, I don't believe, about their siblings.
No.
Right? It was new people to the program. Again, that's on the worst day of those conversations. But that wasn't a terribly strong sentiment. It was expressed when you were at the meeting with Jean. You heard some of those conversations that day were difficult.
I just want to remind people too, and this is a point that's important to emphasize on Lobby Day, thank you, Susan, that METCO is the only program in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that strives to address the long-standing racial segregation that exists in suburban communities and has a very strong track record with regard to student achievement and with regard to graduation rates and with regard to college matriculation rates. So these are all things that are important to make sure our legislators understand that this is a program that's much more about just busing in kids from one place to another, but that it's actually intended to address the fact that suburbs, maybe Brookline isn't as segregated as some of our other METCO communities, and it still may not be exactly where some people would like to see it in terms of race, especially as it relates to, let's just name it, and as it relates to African Americans, blacks, Latinos, Latinas. That's important. That's an important difference to know. And so as you're advocating for METCO, as you're educating and talking with supporters of the METCO program, or even those who still are learning about METCO, that's important for people to keep in mind, that METCO is here to address that issue.
Yes.
Yes, my question would be, what can we do as parents and members of the METCO program to ensure that this is a long-standing program, whether it be financially or
Right. So the question was, what can we do? Right. And so what some people did is they came to some of those public hearings. Right. There were people in those public hearings. There weren't just the residents. Families there. You know. So I have to give a disclaimer first, right? Superintendents can't get involved in certain levels of override campaigns. I can't be involved in a campaign. What I can do is go out and answer questions like, well, what are we going to get if this override passes? I can say, oh, I can tell you, here's the list. What are we going to lose? What does a no override budget look like? Oh, it looks like this, right? I can do that. I can do factual information. But I can certainly say there is a campaign that will organize, and they certainly will be looking for people to help. Yes, sir.
Can I say what you can't say?
Absolutely.
The only way this is going to happen, I've been in the program, my oldest is 25 years old, and as I've said for many years, being a chairman of this board and everything else, is you're not going to get anywhere until you start getting the numbers to show up at the state. You're not going to get anywhere until you start getting the numbers to show up at the public meetings that you hear about. You're not going to get anywhere until you get into the school. Get to know your principal. Get to know, I don't think we know, get to know when his kids' birthdays are. Personal, I have great personal relationships with a lot of parents in Brookline at this point still. They will sit their kids in my house. Hey, look over there, I see them with my house. That's what's going to have to happen. I mean, I see a lot of new faces that I don't know. A lot of the old faces that I do know, we're now old and our kids are gone and I got one more left. But the only way we're going to do this is get to know each other and get to know where to support. Get to know, I can't be there, but can you take 5 people with you and be there? And go in and listen. That's the only way we're going to do it. And I think that's what's kept this program going thus far. I mean, we've had some, like myself, I have a very strong opinion. I've been involved in a lot of these meetings. I've worked at the State House for many years. And I told the story many years ago, there were nurses in Quincy Hospital that were going to shut it. About 400 or more, much more, took from the State House all the way down to Arlington Street. They took the road. That didn't happen. METCO had their lobby day. We had, when I was at the State House, we had maybe 12 families show up. So now, and I can tell you this, when the legislators get together, okay, METCO's up. Yeah, they had 12 people here. Yeah, let's start to look at getting rid of that. But if they look at their list and they go, crap, they got the whole street meeting. It's going to be stronger for us. He's supporting the program. It's going to be stronger for him to go in. Look, I didn't tell him to be here, but I'm supporting him because I know how many people they got. That's what's going to take. We can sit here with 50 families right now. We've got to grow.
thank you for saying that. You have a delegation that represents Brookline that are very strong supporters, right? But, I mean, part of the problem is that there's a lot of other legislators beyond those people, and they need to hear your message.
Superintendent?
They need to hear this message.
Just,
Yes, sir.
just to add on to what this gentleman's saying, there's two worlds going on here. It's Superintendent Lupini's world relative to the mandate he has as a town official in Brookline and what the selectmen and the school committee make available for him so that he can do the great work that he does in the schools. And those dollars that he gets, a chunk comes from us, the Commonwealth. So he looks at two big pots of money. It's called Chapter 70 and local aid. Those are two big deals for Brookline. And in that's where a lot of the challenges that have happened in the past. It's that it hasn't grown the way, it hasn't grown in the way that the spending is happening because of inflation and all these other things that go on. The other part is relative to METCO. It's that extra piece, that extra piece that adds on to the budget so that they are able to take the students in. He's right in that sense in that your presence makes a big deal in the State House. You're right in that you're right that the presence makes a big deal in the State House, but by virtue of people being committed to it, it's not like, there's a long list and everybody picks on like that. There's I don't know, there's 6,000 bills that were filed the other day in the State House. There's, $37 billion worth of budget that's being spent. Right now, the governor and the treasurer today in her opening remarks to the legislature said they do recognize that there is over $760 million hole that they have to try and fill for this 15-16 period. They've said that they're going to hold local aid and Chapter 70, the two pots that fund the schools, harmless, but there's all these other things that come into play which could be the METCO funding. So we're going into two things right now. What's left of this year till June 31st, till June 30th, and also we're going into the budget session for next year. The governor files his budget in March. So on lobby day, it's particularly important that all of you come so that you're able to tell your family story relative to these two things. Please support local aid. Please support whatever has been committed to in last year's budget, but also in this upcoming budget, please make sure that I don't know what the request is, and I'm sure that Susan will throw that out, to be clear on the message and that bring people to come out and see if you're able to bring some of the families that come with you so that they can speak to tell the story about what METCO is all about. And I think that's where the challenges are, is that I don't think sometimes people know exactly what METCO is all about, how it came to be, and also the value that it brings into this system, as well as the Brookline is one, but there are others. And if you advocate strongly for this, it trickles into the other programs in Weston and in Wellesley and in all the other Newton and all these other programs as well, because Brookline they've been very good. They've been incredible in terms of maintaining the commitment, but make no mistake about it, the dialogue is changing from when I started participating in programs 15 years ago to now. Believe you me, the dialogue and the debate has changed. Everybody is looking at those numbers, so the advocacy has to increase.
Thank you. The only other point I'd make to your point is that also translates at the local level. So this comes on stage, so right. But showing up is important. Showing up is very helpful. I mean, some of you were at some subcommittee meetings of the override study discussions last year. It made a difference. It makes a difference when you're there.
If I may say this last thing, when I hear you say that, I think we should have been saying, and it was a key word that she used that's kind of like that we little disturbing. All I'm hearing is current members. So that means if we don't get out there, we'll stay with the current. But if you got a sibling, if your little one's got a sibling, 17-18 budget, because we didn't do much in the 15-16 budget, all we need to take care of the current. We don't need to take care of the future. unless we do something about it. We have to think futuristic.
What's a buffer zone? Excellent. Boy, watch this. So a buffer zone is an area in residence in the district that the school committee has examined and determined that they could actually be assigned to any of, generally speaking, 2 schools, sometimes 3. There's actually one buffer zone that's 4, right? And so what it does is it gives me flexibility. Because the people who live there, I can assign them to any of those 2 schools, 3 schools, 4 schools, depending on what the enrollments look like at those schools. Now, people make requests when they register. We're going to start kindergarten registration the first week of February. Kindergarten 5 by September 1st. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Each 5. And so many people will come in and they live in a buffer zone. But let's say they're in a Pierce Lawrence buffer zone. So they'll come to Pierce School to register for kindergarten. And we'll note that they're Pierce Lawrence, but they're requesting Pierce. And then later on we determine which of those schools we send them to. If they're siblings at one of the schools, always send them there. Right? Same with METCO. Same, by the way, with our materials. If they're not, we try to honor their requests, but sometimes we can't. It'll be one of those 2 or 3 or 4 schools. Okay? Thanks for asking. Yes?
Ask about the park exams that were
Absolutely.
and your thoughts about that and the past and yeah.
Yeah. So, let's see how to do this. So, Massachusetts is in a state of transition. For last year, in a number of classrooms, maybe some of your children's classrooms, we were asked to pilot the park exam, which is an exam that is based on the Common Core, which Massachusetts has adopted, and is created by a consortium of states, right? I think that today there are 11. I think there are 11. There may be less. Mississippi dropped out of the park consortium last week, so I think it's 11. And so they were piloting these tests because Massachusetts, the commissioner, had laid out a plan to ask the State Board of Education to vote this fall to end MCAS and adopt PARC as the statewide assessment. Now, what are the differences besides the fact that it's based on the Common Core? There's a technology option. Some of our students, maybe some of your students, took the exam on a device. And remember, it was sort of a beta test, so they weren't getting scored. They were sort of testing the test for this past year. For this year, school districts were given a choice. Will you administer MCAS or will you administer PARC? Now, one big asterisk, there's only one place where everyone is still doing MCAS, 10th grade, because that's the competency determination for graduation. There's no PARC ready for the competency determination yet. So in 10th grade, at least through 2018, we're all going to be doing MCAS. I see people calculating again, I see you. So we're going to be doing that. So school district by school district, we voted what our school district would do. Most school districts opted for PARC. Most school districts in the Commonwealth opted for PARC. Brookline opted to stay with MCAS. That was my recommendation, and I'll tell you why. We had lengthy meetings. We actually started out in the camp of PARC. And what swayed me in the end was the fact that PARC was not ready with accommodations for students who have IEP. Okay? Here's what I mean by that. Some of your students may take the MCAS assessment, and your student may have an IEP, and there's a series of accommodations that they can receive because of having that IEP. They might have the test read to them, they might be able to use a graphic organizer, there are lots of things, right? Park is not allowing today graphic organizers. Well, that's some pretty significant number of our students. So I couldn't recommend in the end an assessment where students weren't going to be accommodated with what's in their legal IEP. Okay? That was the main reason. There are some other struggles. If you pay attention to any of this, don't for now, there's a lot of testing. Park is a pretty marked increase in the number of testing sessions and the amount of time. And I think they still need to deal with that. But remember, this year it was a local school district decision, and next year it's not. This fall, what we've been told is that the State Board of Education will vote on the commissioner's recommendation of whether we're going to Park or not. And if not, what the commissioner would say is you're going to see down the road a very different MCAS. It's probably going to be online. It's going to be one of these, what they call next generation assessments. At the same time, I'll tell you that nationally there's a conversation about how much we're testing. Are we testing too much? And so there's been quite I'm pretty involved in the Superintendent's Association, and there's been a pretty vigorous conversation about the amount of testing versus teaching that we're doing in schools. And I'll tell you what I've said to the commissioner over and over again, which is I think there's a big difference. I think we confuse these terms. I think there's a big difference between testing, like MCAS, and assessment, which is designed to give the teacher information to improve their instruction. We do a lot of assessment, and guess what? I think we should do more. Right? I think we do too much testing. So this fall, we'll know. Now, to the politics of what's going on at the time, right? We have a new governor. We have a new Secretary of Education, right? I don't know whether we'll have the same commissioner. That sometimes changes when new governors come in. Will a new administration feel the same way about the recommendation on Park as the prior administration? I don't know. What I know is what we've said very loudly to the Secretary and the Commissioner, and that is that this confusion is not good for school districts. Right? It's not good that I'm standing in front of you in January, and I have no idea how we're getting to a decision on an assessment system for the spring of 2016. That's not good. Right? We should be able to communicate that to people. We need to know what we're doing. We need to know how to plan for those tests, what the schedule looks like, all of those kinds of things. So we need to get at it now so we can better answer those questions. Okay? Is that helpful? Now, Boston, I understand, has decided they're doing 100% Park, I believe. And that was an individual district by Newton is doing Park. So it was an individual district by district. For me, it was about accommodation. For me, in my recommendation. For what? Well, so MCAS will still have the accommodations that have always been in place. They can't, my opinion, for what it's worth, they can't roll this assessment out without having those accommodations in place. I mean, they'll deal with the Office of Civil Rights, right? I mean, it's a legal document that has civil rights implications. You can't base anything on this high stakes test. Let's face it, in one way or another, they're all high stakes, right? The MCAS, the Park. You can't do that without being able to provide kids with the accommodations that are in their legal IEP. Right? I mean, I've been with this group before, right? As many of you know, I have 3 children. The youngest is a senior in high school now. I'm smiling now. I'll have 3 tuition payments next fall, right? So I won't be smiling much today. So, and she's legally blind, right? And so
she has a set of accommodations for when she took the MCAS. She used to have enlarged text. And so I'm particularly sensitive to saying, well, we're just piloting a test. Come on, she can do it different. No, she can't. Right? And kids who need graphic organizers need graphic organizers. That's why it's in the legal document. Right? So they have a lot of work to do in this area. Yes, sir.
I know Brookline is having a pretty big issue with a lot of them, particularly indoor. And one of the ideas that was floated last time was possibly having like a central environment is what I heard. That's what some people at the school were saying. I didn't hear anything about that. I was just wondering, number one, if that's true, and number two, another thing to possibly fix the over enrollment of possibly building our high school. Those are two things that we were sort of with the parents of the school.
Sure, happy to. So at the beginning of this, I talked a little bit about this, but not specifically to some of those issues. So what's really interesting about this is we do have this way we're going to accommodate some of the building that's going to go on for devotion school, and then we're going to move the grade 5 through 8 to the old Lincoln School. And we're looking for another location for their K through 4. At Baker, we're looking at modulars. At Pierce, we're looking at rental properties, those kinds of things to accommodate some of our enrollment growth. There was an idea floated about another building that we control, the Baldwin School, and whether we might move all of Baker kindergarten there as a more permanent solution. But for now, we're pretty comfortable with this modular solution, although it will tax the common space, right? There's less room in the cafeteria, those kinds of things. What's really fascinating about the conversation right now is that we're a K-8 district, and people are really pleased with K-8, and they like K-8. Have a public hearing or something and challenge the idea of whether we should be K-8 and see what happens when people come out. Except, as we started to talk about the educational program that we're going to put in place at the old Lincoln School for students from devotion, right? A real focus on technology, a real focus on project-based learning. People have begun to say to me, can my kid go there? I mean, I'm over here at the Driscoll School, but I heard Monica Crowley, she's the principal there, I heard her presentation, right? Are you going to take kids other than devotion there? Right? And so, educationally, we've latched on to something we think is very promising. Now, one of the things that we've talked about from the beginning is Old Lincoln School is going to give us a chance to do some things that we then can transfer back to all of our other schools. So I was at a meeting this afternoon where all of our principals are talking about what aspects of project-based learning and the infusion of technology we can begin to integrate into the middle grades, right? Which is exactly what we were trying to achieve, an improvement in that experience. Because quite frankly, people have said, even supporters of K-8 have said this to me. They've said, I love the K-8 model. Sometimes the middle level's a little weak. It's a little different. It's not as strong as if you have larger numbers of middle schoolers, although my kids went to a middle school, I can tell you about larger numbers of middle schoolers, right? Together, there's a difference. Some programming you can't do and whatever. Do you have ways of, we're looking at some of those ways, being able to approximate some of those experiences, even in the K-8. High school. So we're in the middle of a concept study. February 11th at the high school. February 11th at the high school. You'll want to go and hear this because it's going to be really interesting. It's great stuff. Right? We're looking at a concept study where we're playing out ideas, ways of possibly handling when Brookline High School has 2,600 and maybe beyond high school age students. Right? So we're looking at the idea of a second high school. We're looking at the idea of enlarging that campus, enlarging on that space. Right? Nothing's been ruled in, nothing's been ruled out. It's ideas at this point. And we're looking at the idea of, are there certain kinds of programs, are there certain kinds of concepts that even if they were located as far away as the old Lincoln School, right, that could be part of Brookline High School but could be a specialized program. Something like school within a school. Something like that. Are there pardon? Well, it could be vocational, although that's hard to do with that building, but it could be vocational. So there's lots of ideas around that. So we're looking at all of those ideas and nothing's been decided. What we know, I think we know now, is that this spring, when we have to submit what's called a statement of interest to the school building authority, to say our next important project after we're done with the devotion school is, I believe that both the Board of Selectmen and the school committee are going to vote that that's Brookline High School. So that conversation will begin to ramp up much more quickly. I do believe if you have students going to the high school in that 2018, 2019 range in there, right, you're going to find us using the old Lincoln School building as another building on, I know this is a stretch, on the high school campus. Just think of the high school campus just got bigger, right? Because we're going to need the space. And we're going to be operating some classes there. Now, some people said to me, oh, right, you're going to do something like the 9th grade school, like they did back in the 90s. Our 9th graders won't fit. It's too large of a class. So it can't be just a 9th grade school. It's going to have to be something else yet to be determined. Right? So we have a lot of work to do associated with this growth from kindergarten through, right, senior year. What else? Some shy groups.
Today, not typically.
Anything else you want to talk about?
Wait time, isn't that what we learned?
Yes. You know if I waited long enough. Yeah.
I just have a comment, and I just want to give recognition to the peer school. They have done a very good job in communicating some of the changes and some of the conversations. So I think, for me, that's why I have a lot of questions, because a lot is happening.
That is terrific. Thank you for saying that. I've seen a lot of what Piper's put out, and it is terrific. I think, I was happy to stand up here and say this about the Baker School and see some people's heads go like this. It's really, I think, great that our principal's done such a great job communicating in these really difficult times, and they are difficult times. What we have been able to do that I'm particularly proud of, since you mentioned Pierce, is at Devotion and Pierce and Baker this year, we were able to actually, in the last 2 years, able to add to the administration. Right? We were able to add another vice principal at each of those schools, and it was overdue. Not only from the standpoint of they have staffs that are larger, and so they have, if you took a look at their evaluation load for teachers, they were undoable. They were undoable. We pride ourselves on evaluation being a really important component of what we do, and they couldn't do it. So we added Dan Green at your school, Denton Fowler at Baker, and Jen Bueller at the Devotion School. So we've added now a second vice principal. You may know that in that plan, again, Devotion people, we have added another vice principal. When that school's 1,000, our plan says that's a school with 4 administrators. So we've tried to keep up in terms of the administrative support necessary for teachers and kids in those schools. Thank you so much for saying that about here. I really appreciate you coming. Thank you. This program is very important to me. It's one of the reasons, I've said this for years coming to these forums, it's one of the reasons I wanted to come to Brookline. Gene tells this story about when I was in Beverly before I went to Brookline. The first time I ever met Gene McGuire was in the middle, some of you may remember, of the Linfield saga. Remember the Linfield? I don't need to say anymore, right? Yeah, okay. So I called Gene on the phone and didn't know who she was and said, we're happy to have a conversation here in Beverly about METCO. If that's what's going on in Linfield. We're kind of far. I met somebody tonight who sent a child to Marblehead, right? At one point, yeah, at one point. But I had a school committee there, the administration. We were very interested in being supportive of this terrific program. And I was thrilled to be able to come to Brookline and be supportive of the program, be involved in the program, and I mean, as I said earlier, involved. It is important for me to be part of that conversation with our legislators. It is important for me to be part of that conversation with people in governor's office, as I have been for a number of years, in supporting this program. And so I'm really appreciative of having the chance to come out and talk with you, and hope you'll invite me back many, many times to do it again. Thanks.
So I'd like to just add that, as Bill talked about METCO being a part of the Brookline system, that creates a appeal for him coming here. Brookline's commitment to METCO, superintendent's commitment, the school committee's commitment is part of the reason why I went to METCO. And so I still feel that support for our program is strong. I feel very fortunate, and trust me when I tell you, it's not to knock other districts. The support could be wavering in some places sometimes. It feels good to be someone that works here, that serves you, that serves your children. It feels good to be a place that actually believes in the values of this program. And so thank you, and thank you, Susan, for taking time to be here. Although I'm going to plug Lobby Day one more time, I will say you don't have to wait for Lobby Day to get in touch with your legislators. You should be in touch with them anyway. Send them an email, send them a letter. I can give you an example of a draft letter. What I will say, however, is that it really makes a bigger difference when you write something that's not as kind of formulaic, and then you write about your own experience. And what's really nice also, your children, I don't want to force children to do something they don't want to do, but talk with them. Why do they think METCO is so great? Do they know what METCO is? We METCO staff, we try to teach our children, our students, what METCO is about. We don't want to single kids out, and we want them to understand this is a nearly 50-year-old voluntary desegregation program. You have volunteered to send your children out into the suburbs, and your children, while I think many of them are so well integrated, they may not even realize they're in METCO, that we want them to understand that there's a lot of people that follow this program to make what it is. Did we expect that it would last 50 years or that there would be a need for it? No, not necessarily. I wish there weren't. The reality is there is. And so we have work to do, and we can't rely on others to do that. I will commend our Brookline Friends of METCO group. They have been on your behalf, and many of you are part of that listserv and groups. They have been working so hard to express what they value about the program. And we need more information more frequently, so that everyone can see and understand why this program is so beneficial to everyone involved. So thank you again, Bill, for being here tonight. And you will come over early tonight.